I'm Dylan, 38 male, and for the past year I've been watching the woman I love disappear, replaced by a ghost of grief that is actively destroying our family. My wife's pain, a crushing weight from her parents' passing, has twisted her into an angry, critical person. She started taking that pain out on our kids, and I had to give her one last chance to get help before I filed for custody. But just when a sliver of hope appeared, her recovery got complicated when her estranged brother returned, threatening to pull her back into the darkness for good. Before the silence, our house was a symphony of joyful noise. Chloe, my wife, was the conductor. Her laughter was the melody that ran through every room, a warm and constant presence. She was an elementary school teacher before we had kids, and she carried that same nurturing, patient energy into our home. Our daughter, Lily, who is 10 now, inherited her mother's artistic flair. Their heads would be bent together over the dining room table for hours, surrounded by a colorful chaos of crayons, glitter, and glue, creating worlds on paper. Our son Noah 6 was the percussion section. A bundle of boundless energy, his stomping feet and happy shouts were the rhythm of our life. Chloe was his biggest fan, cheering his every look at me moment, her eyes shining with pure adoration. The Chloe I married could find the silver lining in a thunderstorm. She was the one who taught me how to let go of my architect's need for rigid order and embrace the beautiful mess of family life. Our home wasn't just a structure of wood and drywall. She had filled it with love, turning it into a sanctuary. Then a year ago, the music stopped. A slick road, a patch of black ice, and a single devastating phone call. Chloe's parents, the kindest people I'd ever known, were gone, just like that. The silence they left behind was deafening, and in that silence a new Chloe began to emerge, a stranger who looked like my wife but spoke with a voice sharpened by grief. The first time I saw the shift, the real cutting change, was about 2 months after the funeral. Lily, in a moment of childhood clumsiness, knocked over a glass of orange juice. It spread across one of her new drawings, a vibrant portrait of our family. Before Chloe would have said, "Oops, let's clean it up, sweetie, we can make another one." Instead, a cold fury filled her eyes. "Lily, look what you've done," she snapped, her voice like cracking ice. "Can't you be careful for 5 seconds? This is ruined, absolutely ruined." Lily's face crumpled, tears streamed down her cheeks as she looked from her mother's angry face to the soggy paper. It wasn't about the drawing, it was about the venom in the words. I stepped in, trying to mediate. "Chloe, it was an accident." She turned on me. "Of course you'd say that, Dylan. You don't understand, you just don't get it." She snatched the ruined drawing and threw it in the trash, leaving Lily sobbing at the table. I wrapped my arms around my daughter, my heart aching. That was the first time I felt like I had to protect my children from their own mother. Incidents began to stack up, each one chipping away at the foundation of our home. Noah brought home a diorama he'd made for school. It was a chaotic 6-year-old's masterpiece of a dinosaur habitat, complete with lopsided clay volcanoes and plastic trees glued in at odd angles. He presented it to Chloe with a proud, gap-toothed grin. She barely glanced at it. "The volcano is crooked, Noah," she said flatly. "And the T-Rex is supposed to be bigger than the Stegosaurus. Didn't they teach you that?" Noah's grin vanished, replaced by a look of utter confusion and hurt. He took his diorama and went to his room without a word. I followed him a few minutes later and found him pulling the dinosaurs off, his small shoulders shaking. "Mommy doesn't like it," he whispered. That night I stayed up late with him and we fixed the volcano together, but I couldn't fix the look in his eyes. Our home, once a sanctuary, became a place of tension. The kids learned to move quietly, to speak in whispers as if trying not to wake a sleeping dragon. They stopped showing Chloe their drawings and their school projects. They stopped running to her for comfort. Instead, they came to me. I became their buffer, their shield. My attempts to talk to Chloe were met with a wall of defensive anger. "What do you want from me, Dylan?" she'd shout. "My parents are gone. Do you expect me to just be happy all the time?" "No, Chloe, I don't," I'd say, trying to keep my voice steady. "I expect you to feel your pain, but you're not just feeling it, you're using it as a weapon against the kids, against me." One night, after a particularly bad argument over something trivial, she hurled the cruelest words of all. "You have no idea what this feels like," she seethed, her face pale with rage. "You still have your parents. You have your perfect, unbroken little life. You stand there with your blueprints and your neat little lines trying to fix everything, but you can't fix this. You can't fix me. Maybe you're just not strong enough to handle a woman who is broken." Her words struck me harder than any physical blow. It wasn't just that she was in pain, it was that she was pushing me away, trying to make me feel as isolated as she did. I looked around the quiet, dimly lit living room, the space that used to echo with laughter. Now it was a house of whispers and walking on eggshells. I looked at the photos on the mantelpiece, our wedding, the kids as babies, family vacations. It was all from the before. I knew then that I couldn't let this continue. The loving conductor of our family symphony was gone, and the woman in her place was leading us all into a destructive silence. It wasn't just about my pain anymore, or even hers. It was about Lily and Noah. They were losing their mother, and I was losing my wife. I realized with a terrifying clarity that my inaction was a form of consent. By trying to patiently wait it out, I was allowing the damage to deepen. A choice had to be made, a line had to be drawn, not to punish her but to save us all. The final straw wasn't a dramatic explosion. It was a quiet, soul-crushing moment of cruelty. It was Lily's 10th birthday. I had tried to make it special, a small island of joy in our turbulent sea of grief. We had a little party planned with a few of her close friends. I'd ordered her favorite cake, chocolate with raspberry filling, and decorated the living room with pink and purple streamers. Lily was so excited, she'd put on a new dress and spent an hour brushing her hair. Her friends arrived, and for a while the house was filled with the sound of children's laughter. It felt like a memory of a different life. Chloe remained distant, sitting in an armchair in the corner of the room, a stormy presence in a sea of celebration. She hadn't helped with the decorations, hadn't even wished Lily a happy birthday with any real warmth. She was just there, a spectator at her own daughter's life. The moment came to cut the cake. The girls gathered around the table, singing happy birthday as Lily, her face glowing, prepared to blow out the 10 candles. Just as she took a deep breath, Chloe spoke from her corner, her voice cutting through the happy song. "You should have worn the blue dress, Lily," she said, her tone devoid of any emotion. "Pink makes you look washed out." The singing faltered, the other girls fell silent, looking awkwardly between Lily and Chloe. Lily's smile collapsed. The light in her eyes extinguished in an instant. She blew out the candles, but the wish was gone. Her shoulders slumped and she wouldn't look at anyone. A 10-year-old girl, publicly shamed by her mother on her birthday over the color of her dress. My heart shattered. I saw the confused, pitying looks on the faces of her friends. I saw my daughter shrink into herself, her special day poisoned by a single, needless comment. I quickly tried to salvage the moment, my voice overly bright. "Let us have some cake," but the damage was done. The party ended soon after, the joy having evaporated from the room. That night, after I tucked a still subdued Lily into bed, her whispered, "Why is mommy so mean now?" echoing in my head, I knew I couldn't put this off any longer. My duty as a father had to supersede my hope as a husband. I found Chloe in the kitchen, staring out the window into the darkness. I stood there for a long moment, my speech rehearsed in my head but feeling alien on my tongue. The love I felt for her was still there, buried under layers of frustration and sorrow. I remembered her laugh, the way she'd tuck her hair behind her ear when she was concentrating, the feeling of her hand in mine. I was about to risk losing all of it forever. "Chloe," I began, my voice quieter than I intended. She didn't turn around. "What, Dylan's?" "We can't go on like this," I said, forcing strength into my tone. "What you did to Lily today, it was cruel. You broke her heart on her birthday." She finally turned, her eyes flashing. "Oh, here we go, St. Dylan coming to lecture me on my parenting. It was a comment about a dress. Kids are resilient." "No, they're not," I shot back, stepping closer. "They're not resilient to this, not when it's every day. Noah is afraid to show you his toys. Lily thinks you don't love her. They tiptoe around this house like it's a minefield. You are hurting them, Chloe. Your pain is drowning them." "My pain," she scoffed, her voice rising. "My parents are dead. You have no right to tell me how to grieve." "I'm not telling you how to grieve." My own voice was rising now, filled with a year of pent-up anguish. "I'm telling you that you can't use it as an excuse to be cruel. You need help, real, professional help, a therapist, a grief counselor, something." Her laugh was bitter and sharp. "So that's your solution, see? Ending me off to a stranger to talk about my feelings, so you don't have to deal with it anymore. So our children can have their mother back," I said, my voice cracking. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to be calm, to deliver the words that felt like a betrayal. "This is the hardest thing I've ever had to say, but I have to say it. I've spoken to a lawyer, Chloe." Her face went slack, the anger draining away, replaced by shock. "You what?" "Just to know my options," I said, my heart pounding. "To know how to protect the kids if I have to. And this is the line in the sand. I am giving you one last chance. You will make an appointment with a therapist. You will go and you will actually try. You will get help to manage this grief so it doesn't keep spilling onto our children." I paused, the next words tasting like ash in my mouth. "And if you refuse, or if you don't take it seriously, I will file for separation and I will seek full custody of Lily and Noah. I won't let you destroy them. I love you, but I love them more than I'm afraid of losing you." The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. She stared at me, her expression unreadable. I saw flashes of the woman I married, her vulnerability, her fear, battling with the hardened stranger she'd become. Her whole body trembled, and then the facade broke. A wave of gut-wrenching sobs overtook her, and she sank to the floor, her hands covering her face. It wasn't the angry, defiant reaction I'd expected. It was the sound of complete and utter brokenness. I fought every instinct to rush over and hold her to tell her I didn't mean it, but I did mean it. I had to. After several minutes that felt like an eternity, her sobs subsided into ragged breaths. She looked up at me from the floor, her face streaked with tears, her eyes filled with a terrifying mix of defeat and despair. "Okay," she whispered, the word barely audible, "I'll do it." There was no relief in her agreement, no sense of victory. A tense, fragile truce had been called, but the battle was far from over. I had drawn a line in the sand, and we were both left standing on opposite sides of it, staring at the wreckage of our life together. The first few weeks after the ultimatum were like living in the eerie calm after a storm. The air was thick with unspoken words and unresolved tension. Chloe moved through the house like a phantom, her agreement hanging between us. True to her word, she found a therapist specializing in grief and trauma. I drove her to the first appointment, the silence in the car so profound I could hear my own heartbeat. When she came out an hour later, her face was pale and drawn, her eyes red-rimmed. She didn't speak about it, and I didn't ask. The initial sessions seemed to dredge up more pain than they healed. There were days she would come home and lock herself in our bedroom for hours. The house remained quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet now. It wasn't the quiet of fear, but the quiet of fragile, painstaking work being done. I held my breath, praying that the foundations of her soul were being repaired and not demolished further. Then, about a month in, I saw the first crack of light. I was in the kitchen making dinner, and Noah was at the table, humming to himself as he struggled to draw a superhero. He let out a frustrated sigh. "I can't get the cape right, Daddy." Before I could respond, Chloe walked in. My body tensed automatically, preparing for a critical comment. She paused and looked over Noah's shoulder. He flinched slightly, expecting the usual disapproval. Instead, Chloe pulled up a chair. "You know," she said softly, her voice gentle in a way I hadn't heard in a year, "the trick to a good cape is to make it look like the wind is blowing it, like this." She took a pencil and, with a few deft strokes, drew a flowing, dynamic cape on a scrap piece of paper. Noah's eyes widened. "Wow, can you do that on mines?" She gave a small, hesitant smile. It was the first genuine smile I'd seen on her face in what felt like a lifetime. "Sure, sweetie." For the next 10 minutes she sat with him, not just drawing but talking. She asked him about the superhero's powers, his name, his mission. She was present, she was engaged. She was, for a fleeting moment, the mother he remembered. I watched from the stove, a lump forming in my throat. It was a tiny interaction, a miniature masterpiece of normalcy, but it felt monumental. Slowly, more of these moments began to surface. One evening, Lily was practicing a piece on the piano, stumbling over a difficult passage. Chloe, who used to be a beautiful pianist herself, walked over. Instead of pointing out the mistakes, she sat down on the bench beside her. "That's a tricky part," she said. "Your grandmother taught me that piece. Try slowing it down, just the right hand first." They played together, their hands moving over the keys, and for a few minutes, a hesitant harmony returned to our home. The kids start Ed to uncurl from their defensive positions. Lily began leaving her sketchbook on the coffee table again. Noah would occasionally run to Chloe to show her a new Lego creation. They were cautious, their hope tentative, like seedlings pushing through frozen ground. They were learning to trust her again, and she was learning to be trustworthy. Our own relationship remained strained, but the constant state of conflict subsided. We started talking again, not about the deep, painful things, but about the small, everyday logistics of life. It was a start. One Friday, I took a leap of faith. I was thinking maybe we could go out to dinner tonight, just the two of us. We could get that pizza from the place you like. She looked surprised, then hesitant. I saw the internal battle in her eyes. The old Chloe would have lit up at the suggestion. The grieving Chloe wanted to retreat. After a moment, she gave a slight nod. "Okay, I think I can do that." The dinner wasn't like old times. There were long, awkward silences. We talked around the giant, sleeping monster of her grief that sat between us, but we didn't fight. She asked about my work, I asked about her therapy, and for the first time she offered a small glimpse inside. "She thinks my anger is a shield," Chloe said, staring into her water glass. "That it's easier to be angry than to feel how sad I am, because if I really let myself feel it, I'm afraid I'll fall apart completely and never be able to put myself back together." It was the most vulnerable thing she had said to me in a year. "You wouldn't have to do it alone," I said softly. "I'd be there to help you." She looked at me, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears, and she almost smiled. It was a fragile, fragile hope, but it was real. For the first time, I allowed myself to exhale. I let myself believe that we were on the right path, that the woman I married was fighting her way back to us. We came home to a quiet house, the kids asleep and the babysitter reading on the couch. As I paid her, Chloe walked into the living room, a soft smile on her face. The hope I felt was a warm, expanding presence in my chest. We could do this. We could heal. And then the phone rang. Chloe answered it, her smile still lingering. Hello, her expression shifted instantly. The color drained from her face and the fragile hope that had filled the room shattered like glass. Ethan, she said, her voice a shocked whisper. Where are you? No, you can't. He's what? Okay, yes, stay there. She hung up the phone, her hand trembling. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a new kind of panic. What is it? Who's Ethan? I asked, though a distant memory was already stirring. My brother, she said, her voice shaking. He's back, he's in town. Ethan? The name was a footnote in the story of Chloe's family, a character written out of the script years ago. I had only met him once briefly at our wedding. My impression was of a man who was almost too charming, with a smile that never quite reached his eyes and a handshake that felt more like a calculation than a greeting. Chloe's parents, Carol and David, had been polite but visibly tense in his presence. The story, as I knew it, was a classic tale of disappointment. Ethan, 4 years older than Chloe, was the prodigal son who never returned. He'd bounced between get-rich-quick schemes, leaving a trail of debt and broken promises. The final break came about 5 years before I met Chloe. He had tried to convince his parents to mortgage their paid-off home to fund his latest foolproof venture. When they refused, he'd unleashed a torrent of bitter, resentful words, accusing them of always favoring Chloe. They gave him a final sum of money, told him not to ask for more, and the communication had dwindled to nothing. Chloe had tried to maintain a connection, but Ethan's calls were infrequent and always ended with a request for money she didn't have. Eventually, he just disappeared. Now he was back. An hour after the phone call, a taxi pulled up to our curb. A man stepped out who was an older, harder version of the one I remembered. Ethan's charm had weathered. There were lines of stress around his eyes, but he still carried himself with a practiced, confident swagger. Chloe opened the door before he could even knock. For a moment, they just stood there, two siblings separated by years of silence and hurt. Then he opened his arms. Chloe, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I came as soon as I heard. I'm so sorry. Chloe collapsed into his embrace, a fresh wave of sobs racking her body. He held her, stroking her hair and murmuring platitudes. It's okay, I'm here now, I'm here for you. I stood in the hallway, an uncomfortable observer of this reunion. Ethan's eyes met mine over Chloe's shoulder. He gave me a small, somber nod as if we were partners in this tragedy. I felt an immediate and instinctive distrust. His timing was too perfect, his grief too theatrical. He came inside, Chloe still clinging to his arm as if he were a lifeline. He looked around our home, his eyes scanning everything. Nice place, Dylan, he said. You've done well. It wasn't a compliment, it was an assessment. Over the next few days, Ethan made himself at home. He was the perfect guest on the surface, insisting on helping with dishes, bringing home groceries, and regaling the kids with exaggerated stories of his adventures. Lily and Noah were captivated. He was new and exciting, a distraction from the quiet tension they had grown accustomed to. He brought them expensive, flashy gifts, a top-of-the-line drone for Noah, a professional-grade art set for Lily, things that Chloe and I would have deemed too extravagant. But his primary focus was Chloe. He became her shadow, her confidant, her grief guru. He'd sit with her for hours, listening as she poured out a year's worth of pain. He would nod sympathetically, his expression a mask of deep concern. And then the undermining began. It was subtle at first, like a slow, steady drip of poison. This therapist, he said one afternoon as I walked into the kitchen, catching the tail end of their conversation. Are you sure talking to a total stranger is what you need? Family is what gets you through this stuff. People who actually knew mom and dad. Chloe looked uncertain. She's helping, I think. Is she? Ethan pressed gently, placing a hand on her arm. Or is she just making you relive it over and over? Sometimes you just have to be strong and push through. It's what mom and dad would have wanted. He glanced at me. It must have been so hard for you to handle this all alone, Chloe. A man can't really understand this kind of loss, not the way a daughter does. The comment was a precision strike, designed to create a we versus him dynamic. It positioned me as an outsider and him as the sole member of an exclusive club of grief. I saw a flicker of defiance in Chloe's eyes, a defensiveness of me, but it was quickly extinguished by her desire for her brother's validation. The talk of therapy continued. A few days later, on the morning of her scheduled appointment, Ethan suggested they visit the cemetery instead. We can take flowers, he said. We can talk to them. Isn't that better than sitting in some sterile office? Chloe was torn. I should probably go to my session. You can reschedule, Ethan said smoothly. This is more important. It's about honoring them. Your therapist will understand. She looked at me, her expression pleading for guidance. I kept my face neutral. After the ultimatum, I had vowed not to control her recovery, only to insist that she pursue it. Telling her not to go with her brother would only feed into Ethan's narrative that I was trying to isolate her. It's your decision, Chloe, I said quietly. She chose the cemetery. When she came back, she seemed calmer, but it was a fragile, exhausted calm. Ethan, however, was energized. He had successfully inserted himself between Chloe and her professional help. He was now the gatekeeper of her grief. The atmosphere in the house shifted again. The fragile hope we had cultivated began to wither. The kids were happy to have their fun uncle around, but Chloe's progress stalled. Her temper grew short again, her criticisms sharper. It was as if Ethan's presence gave her permission to regress, his constant validation of her pain allowing her to wallow in it rather than work through it. He praised her strength when she was angry, calling it righteous fire, and dismissed her moments of sadness as weakness. I felt a growing dread. I hadn't just invited a guest into my house, I had let in a saboteur. He wasn't healing his sister, he was enabling her illness, all under the guise of brotherly love. And Chloe, desperate for a connection to the family she had lost, was embracing him with open arms, completely blind to the danger he represented. Ethan's campaign to dismantle Chloe's recovery was insidious and masterfully executed. He didn't use brute force. He used the quiet, persistent erosion of doubt. His primary target was the progress Chloe had made, and his secondary target was me. He started planting seeds about my motives, always couched in concern. Dylan's a good man, Chloe, he'd say over coffee after I'd left for work. An architect, very practical. He wants things to be neat and tidy back in their boxes, but grief isn't neat. He just wants the old Chloe back, but that person is gone. You're different now, stronger. He was reframing my desire for her well-being as a selfish need for convenience. He made her newfound anger and volatility sound like a badge of honor, a sign of her survival, rather than the symptom of unresolved trauma that it was. Chloe missed another therapy session, then another. When I brought it up gently one evening, she became defensive. Ethan is right, she said, her voice hard. You want me to be fixed, he accepts. T.S. me as I am right now. He's the only one who gets it because he lost them too. He's not accepting you, Chloe. He's encouraging the worst parts of your pain, I argued, trying to keep my frustration in check. The part that's hurting you, that's hurting the kids. The kids love him, she shot back. He's bringing laughter back into this house, something you haven't been able to do in a year. That stung, and it was meant to. Ethan was an expert at identifying insecurities and twisting the knife. He had convinced Chloe that his performative fun was a substitute for genuine stability. The real escalation came when Ethan turned his attention to finances. Chloe's parents had been sensible people. They had left a modest but comfortable inheritance, life insurance, and their paid-off house, all of which was now under a grieving and emotionally volatile Chloe's control. You know, Mom and Dad always wanted to invest in property, Ethan said one day, spreading a local real estate guide on the dining table. There's a commercial building for sale downtown, a real bargain. If we went in on it together, we could create something lasting, a legacy for them. My internal alarms blared. This was his old pattern, the one her parents had described. Chloe, we should talk about this, I said carefully later that evening when Ethan was out. Making a major financial decision right now is unwise. Your therapist would probably advise against it. Oh, so now my therapist controls my money too, Chloe retorted. It's my inheritance, Dylan, not yours. Ethan thinks it's a great opportunity, and he's just trying to help me build something for the future. He's trying to get his hands on your money, just like he always did with your parents, I said, the words coming out harsher than I intended. Her face hardened into a cold mask. That is a horrible thing to say. He's my brother, he's grieving. You are just jealous because he understands me in a way you can't. You're trying to control me just like he said you would. We were back to square one, but it was worse now. Before, it was Chloe's grief we were fighting. Now it was Chloe's grief being actively weaponized by a master manipulator. The house became a battleground of alliances. If I disciplined Noah for not cleaning his room, Ethan would swoop in later and tell him, "Your dad's just stressed out, buddy. Don't worry about it," handing him a candy bar. He was positioning himself as the kid's friend and me as the humorless warden. The regression in Chloe was terrifying to watch. The light I had seen returning to her eyes was gone, replaced by a feverish, defensive loyalty to Ethan. Her anger at the kids returned, but now it was often directed by Ethan's passive-aggressive comments. If Lily was being too loud, Ethan wouldn't shush her. He'd just say to Chloe, "Wow, it's amazing you can even think with all that noise. You have the patience of a saint." 5 minutes later, Chloe would snap at Lily to be quiet. I felt like I was going insane, watching him expertly pull the strings while I was powerless to stop it. Every attempt I made to point out his manipulation was twisted into proof of my jealousy and controlling nature. Chloe was completely under his spell, convinced that her brother was her savior and I was her oppressor. The ultimatum felt like a distant memory from a different war. I had won that first battle, but I was decisively losing the war for my wife's sanity and the safety of my family. I knew I couldn't let him win. I wasn't just fighting for my marriage anymore. I was fighting for Chloe herself, trying to save her from the brother who was wrapping her in a cocoon of her own pain. I was out of options. Arguing with Chloe was pointless. She was insulated by Ethan's narrative. Appealing to his better nature was laughable as it was clear he didn't have one. I realized that words were not enough. I needed irrefutable proof, something so clear and undeniable that it could shatter the fortress of lies Ethan had built around my wife. My first step was to reach out to someone who knew the before Ethan. I remembered Chloe's parents mentioning a cousin, Mark, who had once been close with Ethan before getting burned in one of his schemes. It took some digging, but I found his number through an old family address book. I called him that afternoon from my office, my heart pounding. "Mark, this is Dylan, Chloe's husband," I started. "I know this is out of the blue, but I need to ask you about Ethan." There was a long sigh on the other end of the line. "Let me guess," Mark said, his voice weary. "He showed up on your doorstep looking like a kicked puppy, claiming he just wants to help his grieving sister." "That's exactly what happened," I said, a wave of relief washing over me. I wasn't crazy. "Listen to me, Dylan," Mark said, his tone urgent. "Ethan doesn't have a sentimental bone in his body. He sees vulnerability as an opportunity, the last I hear. He was deep in debt from a failed tech startup in another state. He owes some very impatient people a lot of money. If he's back, it's not for Chloe. It's for Carol and David's estate. Get him away from her." Mark's words confirmed my fears and gave them a terrifying new edge. This wasn't just about manipulation, it was about desperation. A desperate man is a dangerous man. But I still needed something concrete, something I could show Chloe. My chance came a few days later. Ethan had been spending hours on his laptop at the dining table, often closing it quickly whenever I or the kids walked by. That evening, he went out to pick up a few things, leaving his computer open and unattended for the first time. I knew it was a massive breach of privacy, but my family's well-being was on the line. My hands trembled as I moved the mouse, waking the screen. His email was open. My eyes scanned the inbox and my blood ran cold. The subject line of a recent message read, "Ray, Estate Strategy." It was from a lawyer I didn't recognize. I clicked on it. The email chain laid out the entire horrifying plan. Ethan was seeking legal advice on how to be declared Chloe's financial conservator, arguing that her unstable mental state following her parents' death made her incapable of managing her own affairs. His lawyer was advising him on how to gather evidence of her incompetence, missed appointments, emotional outbursts, and impulsive decisions. He was documenting every single behavior he was actively encouraging. The final email from Ethan read, "She's becoming more and more dependent on me. She's ready to sign over power of attorney for the real estate investment. Once I have that, we can move on the rest of it. Her husband is a problem, but I'm handling him." I felt physically sick. He wasn't just taking her money, he was orchestrating a complete takeover of her life, using her grief as his primary tool. I quickly took photos of the emails with my phone, my hands shaking so badly the first few were blurry. Now I had the proof, but I knew I couldn't just confront Chloe with it. She would see it as a desperate attack from me. Ethan would deny it, call the emails forgeries, and twist it into another example of my attempts to isolate her. I had to create a situation where Chloe would see his true colors for herself, with no room for doubt. I called Carol and David's longtime estate lawyer, a kind, no-nonsense man named Mr. Harrison, who I knew Chloe trusted implicitly. I explained the situation briefly and asked him if he would be willing to come to the house for an urgent meeting about the estate, a meeting that Ethan would have to attend. The next evening, the stage was set. I told Chloe that Mr. Harrison needed to discuss some time-sensitive tax documents with both of her as the sole heir and Ethan as her next of kin. Ethan looked smug, probably assuming this was his chance to officially insert himself into the legal proceedings. We all sat in the living room. Mr. Harrison, professional and somber, me, my heart hammering against my ribs, Chloe looking tired and anxious, and Ethan looking like the concerned, supportive brother. Thank you all for meeting, Mr. Harrison began. We do have some papers to go over, but Dylan has brought a serious matter to my attention that we must address first. Ethan's smile tightened. Oh, and what's that? I took a breath. Chloe, I love you, I said, looking directly at her. And I know how much you trust Ethan, but I believe he is actively trying to take control of your inheritance. As expected, Chloe's face hardened. Dylan, we've been over this. Stop attacking my brother. Ethan let out a theatrical, wounded laugh. This is unbelievable. Dylan, I'm just trying to support my sister through the worst time of her life. What could possibly make you think that? This was the moment. Because I read your emails, Ethan, I said, my voice steady. The ones to your lawyer about having Chloe declared mentally incompetent so you can become her conservator. The ones where you call my wife's grief a tool to get her to sign over power of attorney. Chloe gasped, looking from me to her brother. Ethan's face went pale, then flushed with rage. He's lying, he's making it up. Chloe, he's trying to turn you against me. Is he? Mr. Harrison interjected calmly, his voice cutting through Ethan's panic. Because a conservatorship filing would be a matter of public record, it would be a very easy lie to disprove. Ethan was cornered. His charming facade dissolved and the desperate, ugly reality underneath was exposed. He shot up from his chair, his eyes wild. He pointed a shaking finger at Chloe. You would believe him over me, he snarled, his voice dripping with venom. After everything I've done for you, I came back for you. I've been holding you together for months. Holding me together, Chloe whispered, her eyes wide with dawning horror. Yes, he spat while he W. As trying to ship you off to a shrink, I was here, I deserved something for that, they always gave you everything, it was always perfect Chloe, responsible Chloe. Even in death they gave it all to you, I am entitled to a piece of it, you've been a useless, crying mess for a year, it's time someone competent handled things. The words hung in the air, brutal and undeniable. The mask wasn't just shattered, it was pulverized. In that moment Chloe saw him. She saw the years of resentment, the greed, the cold, calculating man her parents had tried to protect her from. The brother she had idealized was a fiction. This snarling, entitled stranger was the reality. Her entire body went still. The fog of grief and confusion that had clouded her eyes for a year finally, violently, cleared. A single tear rolled down her cheek, but it wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of clarity. She rose slowly from her chair, her gaze locked on Ethan, her expression one of cold, quiet fury. Get out, she said, her voice dangerously low. Get out of my house. Ethan stood frozen for a second, his ugly words still echoing in the room. He seemed to realize he had gone too far, that his desperate gamble had failed spectacularly. He opened his mouth to try and backtrack, to smooth it over, but Chloe's gaze was unyielding, made of ice and steel. I said, she repeated, her voice rising with a strength I hadn't heard in ages, get out. Now. He finally broke, snatching his jacket from the back of the chair. He shot me a look of pure hatred before turning and storming out of the house. The slam of the front door was a sound of finality, a punctuation mark on a toxic chapter of our lives. The silence he left behind was profound. Mr. Harrison, seeing the rawness of the moment, quietly gathered his papers. I think we can deal with the tax forms another time, he said gently. Chloe, Dylan, call me if you need anything at all. He saw himself out, leaving just the two of us standing in the wreckage. Chloe sank onto the couch, not with the brokenness of before, but with the heavy exhaustion of a soldier after a long, brutal war. I sat down next to her, leaving a small space between us, unsure of what she needed. For a long time, she just stared at the opposite wall. Then she turned to me, her eyes clear and filled with a pain that was, for the first time, not clouded by anger. He was right about one thing, she whispered, her voice hoarse. I have been a mess. You were grieving, Chloe, I said softly. No, she shook her head, tears now streaming freely down her face. It was more than that. I was cruel to Lily, to Noah, she choked on a sob. To you, I let the pain become an excuse for everything, and I let him feed it, because it was easier than facing it myself. She finally looked at me, really looked at me. You gave me an ultimatum. You tried to save me and I called you a villain. You were just trying to protect our family. And I let my brother, my own brother, convince me you were the enemy. I closed the space between us, wrapping my arms around her. She didn't resist. She collapsed against me, her body shaking with deep, wrenching sobs. This was not the helpless, angry crying of the past year. This was the crying of release of shame of a heart finally breaking open to let the poison out. I just held her, my own tears falling into her hair. It was the first time in a year that we felt like a team again, united in our sorrow. The next morning, Chloe made 2 phone calls. The first was to her therapist, scheduling an emergency session. The second was to a lawyer to have a restraining order drawn up against Ethan and to ensure he had no legal pathway to her or her parents' estate. Her true recovery began that day. It wasn't a miraculous transformation, it was a slow, deliberate, and painful process. She started attending therapy twice a week, this time with a fierce, unwavering commitment. She came home drained but present. The most difficult and most important step was her apology to the children. She sat them down on the living room couch a few days later. I stood by the doorway, my heart in my throat. Lily, Noah, she began, her voice trembling. I need to tell you both something very important. For the last year, Mommy has been very sick in her heart. After Grandma and Grandpa died, a big sadness came over me and it made me angry and mean. I said things to you that were not kind and it was not your fault, ever. She looked at Lily. When I was mean about your drawings or your dress, it was because the sickness in my heart was making me ugly inside. It had nothing to do with you. You are a beautiful artist and a wonderful girl, and I am so sorry that I hurt you. Then she turned to Noah. And Noah, when I didn't get excited about your toys or your projects, it was because my heart couldn't feel happiness. You are the most creative, fun boy in the world, and I am so sorry. I made you feel bad. Tears were streaming down her face. I am working very hard with a doctor to heal my heart. It's going to take time, but I promise you, I am going to try every single day to be the mommy you deserve. Lily, ever the sensitive soul, just climbed into her lap and hugged her tightly. Noah hesitated for a moment, then walked over and patted her arm. It's okay, Mommy, he said. Daddy helped me fix the volcano. In that moment, I saw the future. I saw the long road ahead, paved with difficult conversations and the patient work of rebuilding trust. But I also saw that it was possible. Our family dynamic started to change. The House of Whispers slowly found its voice again. There were still bad days, moments where Chloe would retreat into herself or her temper would flare, but the difference was that now she would catch it. She would stop, breathe, and often say, I'm sorry, the anger is trying to come back, I need a minute. And we would give it to her. We learned to communicate, to navigate her triggers and our own fears together. I look back on the ultimatum not as an act of aggression, but as the most painful act of love I've ever committed. It was the moment I chose to fight for my family instead of just surviving within it. I am slowly getting my wife back, not the carefree girl she was before, but someone stronger, more self-aware, and more beautiful in her resilience. We are not fixed, and our story doesn't have a perfect fairytale ending, but it has a real one. It has hope. We are building a new sanctuary, not on the flawless foundation of the past, but on the scarred, messy, and ultimately stronger ground of our shared survival. I am Dylan. I am a husband and a father. And for the first time in a very long time, I am not afraid of what tomorrow will bring. For anyone out there living in a house of whispers, where grief has stolen the voice of someone you love, know that you are not alone. Setting a boundary is not a betrayal. Sometimes, the only way to help someone find their way back is to refuse to let them take you and your children down with them into the darkness.